I'm joined by the co-host of Pod Safe America and President Obama's former National Security Council spokesman, Tommy Vietor. Tommy, appreciate you coming on.
Good to see you, buddy.
So we are right now watching as war seems to be escalating in the Middle East, and despite Donald Trump's promises of being this peaceful president who is adamantly opposed to any new wars, he seems to be very much getting involved in what's happening in Iran. And so is that what's happening right here, where Donald Trump promised one thing and yet is backtracking on that promise?
Yeah, Brian, who can forget how he ended the war in Ukraine in just 24 hours? That was incredibly successful.
Yeah.
Everything in Gaza is now great, thanks to Donald Trump being president.
Actually, one day, too. Couldn't believe that he did it in one day.
Amazing. Yeah. Even the good Lord needs 7 days to do his works. But yeah, no, what it feels like is happening here is Bibi Netanyahu launched this war against Iran with at least Trump knowing about it or some sort of tacit approval. And now Trump is slowly and steadily getting the U.S. drawn into war. The United States is already engaged in hostilities. We're already helping the Israeli government shoot down Iranian drones and missiles. And look, I support that, right? I don't want any innocent civilians to die in Israel or in Tehran, frankly, for that matter. But what it sounds like could happen next is Netanyahu wants Trump to have the U.S. military bomb Iranian targets, and that sounds like they're debating that, like, maybe as we speak.
And so, what are the next steps if that did happen? If the U.S. gets drawn into war, is there the possibility that Iran's proxies like China and Russia could also come into war? And not to get 10 steps ahead here, but is there a world in which this devolves into an actual World War III?
There's a lot of war. There's a lot of scenarios where it leads to chaos. Like in the near term, what Netanyahu wants Trump to do is to use U.S. bombs that are called the MOP, the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, these 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs, and to drop those on the most hardened Iranian targets. The site called Fordo that is literally built into the side of a mountain. There's a bunch of sort of underground nuclear enrichment facilities. They want the U.S. to bomb those because the Israelis don't have the bombs or the bombers you need to do it. But once that happens, all bets are off. There was a New York Times report that came out a couple hours ago that said Iran is pre-positioning missiles and pointing them at U.S. bases in the Middle East. We've got 40,000 troops serving in the Middle East. There's troops and diplomats in Iraq. There's a big base in Bahrain. There's folks in Kuwait. So there are a lot of Americans who would be at risk if Iran decides to start shooting at us directly.
What about the Trump coalition here? Because isn't it composed of quite a few people who expressly gave their support to him under this pretense that he was going to be a president who finally presided over peace, who didn't get the U.S. dragged into yet another war, and now we're seeing what's happening right now?
Yeah, this is what made Trump look and sound so different in 2016. He would stood up on those stages in the debates and was like, no, the Iraq war was a disaster. We were idiots for going into Iraq. This was a regime change top operation that never should have happened. And he also explicitly ran against war with Iran. I think it was in 2012, he tweeted, Obama's going to start a war with Iran to get reelected, right? Nonsensical idiocy. But his whole shtick, his whole pitch when he was running against Joe Biden was October 7th wouldn't have happened if I was president. The Russian invasion of Ukraine wouldn't have happened if I was president. Well, no, a massive war between Israel and Iran is happening on his watch, and he is on the cusp. I would argue that we are already directly involved in this, again, because we are providing these defensive operations. But it sounds like we are on the cusp of having U.S. bombers bomb Iran directly, which is the exact opposite of what he said he'd do as president.
When you see those old clips from 2011, 12, 13, where Donald Trump is taking aim at Barack Obama, calling him weak and having a failing presidency, and that's why he needs to start a war with Iran to try and get his poll numbers up, to try to engender some type of rally around the flag effect. Can I have your reaction to the fact that we're now seeing those clips in light of pretty much the exact thing that he would attack against back then?
He's a fucking idiot. Look. In 2015, Obama cut a deal with the Iranians called the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear agreement. What that deal did was prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. It prevented them from enriching uranium to a certain level that can become weapons grade. It forced them to ship their uranium stockpile out of the country, take a whole bunch of additional steps that would prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon, or at least greatly extend out the timeline for which that it would take them to get a nuclear weapon. Trump pulled us out of that deal. And then not long after Trump pulled us out of the JCPOA, Iran started enriching uranium again. They started funneling more resources to their proxies. So all the terrible things that we saw lead up to October 7th and to lead to this moment where Iran had a huge stockpile of enriched uranium are the direct result of Trump's choice to pull us out of the JCPOA. So he is an arsonist, and now he wants credit for being the firefighter if he goes and bombs the Iranian infrastructure.
So in other words, we had the JCPOA in place thanks to the Obama administration. Donald Trump decides to pull out of it. Is this objectively better? Is there any world in which this is better, where now, instead of having the JCPOA in place to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, now we're just serving as a proxy to fund an Israeli effort to launch into full-scale war against Iran? Is there a world in which that is preferable to what the JCPOA offered?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like there's certainly the hope and a prayer outcomes that could happen. But what seems far more likely is what Bibi Netanyahu is doing in Iran right now is not just about targeting Iran's nuclear infrastructure. This is a regime change operation. They're killing off senior generals. Were all these reports that Donald Trump apparently nixed a plan to kill the supreme leader of Iran. I mean, this is serious stuff. They're just trying to decapitate the leadership in Iran. So what I fear will happen is that Iran's response to getting bombed is that they will decide, okay, well, now we need to double down on our efforts to get a nuclear weapon, because that is the only way to deter the U.S. and Israel. And if there is, massive regime change in Iran, like God knows what chaos could ensue. We saw it in Iraq, we saw it in Libya. I mean, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's hard to know where these things are going to go.
What about the critics of the JCPOA who say that that the Iranians were hiding their actual facilities anyway? And so even though the JCPOA allowed for inspectors to come in, they weren't actually getting access to the weapons that were being built by the Iranians.
I mean, look, the JCPOA did a lot of important things. It limited Iran's enrichment. It forced them to ship out their stockpile. It had really stringent inspections requirements and requirements that the Iranians allow access to the IAEA to inspect their facilities. Like, no diplomatic deal is perfect, right? Like, I understand that there are some people who are unsatisfied by it, but we're looking at the alternative right now. A massive full-scale war that, the last time I saw a count had led to the death of 224 civilians in Iran and 24 Israelis. You're seeing, huge ballistic missiles slamming into targets in downtown Tel Aviv. So, this is the outcome that Barack Obama was trying to avoid the whole time, because everyone agrees that you can't let Iran get a nuclear weapon. The question was, do you try to stop it diplomatically, or do you have a war like this? And right now, this war is looking pretty scary.
If we're looking at a regime change war, does that not just evoke memories from George W. Bush's term where we got into the Iraq War, which ended up being the costliest and probably most unpopular war in modern American history?
Brian, if you turn on Fox News right now, it is indistinguishable from a broadcast from 2003. It is like nonstop IDF B-roll of airstrikes. It is the same exact neocons and hawks that we used to see cheerleading us into Iraq, cheerleading us into Iran.
Those people, of course, the mouthpieces are going to mouthpiece, right? Like that's their whole thing. Donald Trump says jump, they say how high. But they've also groomed their audience into not wanting the exact thing that they're selling them now. And so, do you think that disconnect is going to present itself here, and that we're actually? I mean, we already saw Dave Smith come out and basically say that he regretted his vote for Donald Trump. Do you think that the extent to which Donald Trump himself and all of these mouthpieces groom their audience into not wanting the thing that they're delivering them right now is going to have any effect, or do you think that whatever as Donald Trump turns right, they're going to turn right, as he turns left, they'll turn left? Doesn't really matter what the policy is, they're just going to follow the guy?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, look, Fox News is doing their thing. They're cheerleading a war, as they always do. Right. But if you look at some other pretty prominent members of the MAGA coalition, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Tucker Carlson,
Steve Bannon, they are pretty vocally speaking out against this war. And like even the more hard right networks like OAN and stuff are going more in that direction. So I don't know, ultimately, like, are those four people going to break from Donald Trump? I doubt it, but it is like they're being quite clear that Donald Trump promised to keep us out of a war with Iran, and he's about to get us into one. And I'm certainly there will be some voters that don't like that.
And finally, let's finish off with this. You know, a lot of these big moves that Trump has made came in the immediate aftermath of really bad weeks of coverage between his fallout with Elon Musk, this budget bill that was incredibly unpopular that would strip healthcare away from 14 million Americans, food stamps away to the tune of $300 billion, explode the deficit. And then suddenly we had these ICE raids, we had the National Guard being federalized, the Marines getting sent into Los Angeles, war breaking out in Iran. To what extent do you think that this is a purposeful strategy to distract from what would otherwise be just his failing domestic agenda?
In this case, I don't really think it's that. I think this is Bibi Netanyahu maybe deciding to bomb Iran in part because he's got some real political problems and potentially doing so at a time that the White House didn't particularly like. I agree with you that like they're thrilled that we're not talking about, you know, his fight with Elon Musk and ketamine abuse and all of that stuff. But I don't know. I think Trump's instinct is to know that these wars can go badly and that it could hurt him politically. But there was a report in the Times today that, you know, he was hard against the U.S. being involved in this operation against Iran. And then he turned on the TV in the morning and Fox News was doing all this triumphant coverage and he just couldn't resist himself. You know, and he slowly started calling around reporters and taking credit for what had happened because it was being portrayed on Fox as some sort of like a brilliant masterstroke by the Israeli military. And Trump just needed a piece of that.
Yeah, full audience capture presidency. That's what this is.
100%.
Tommy, how can people who are watching, listening right now hear more from you?
First of all, they should subscribe to your channel, Brian, because it's where I get all my news. But they could also subscribe to Pod Save America on YouTube and Pod Save the World on YouTube and as a podcast if you want to.
Awesome. I will put those links right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Highly recommend for everybody watching right now. Help us grow this progressive media ecosystem so that when people log on looking for news right now, the more views, the more subscribers that folks like Tommy and his co-hosts over at Pod Save America and Pod Save the World have, the more likely it is that they're going to get filtered to those channels and not right-wing channels. So again, if you're not yet subscribed, I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Tommy, appreciate your time.
Great to be here.